Hope everybody's having a good Sunday evening. I saw this Upton Stout working out, and it made me want to talk about Raheem Morris and how he's going to build this 49ers defense and which free agents the 49ers might add to fit in. And, those split squats, that is not an easy exercise. Upton Stout was a very, very successful rookie for the 49ers in 2025. You look at him working out and you talk about strength. Remember at the combine last year, this guy had more bench press reps at 225 pounds than any other cornerback. But look at some of the metrics for Upton Stout. He led the entire NFL, all cornerbacks, with 10 pressures this past season, which tells you that he was able to rush the passer. And when I listen to Raheem Morris, when I study Raheem Morris, I see a defensive coordinator who I think is going to want to get after it with some of the pressure rates. The Falcons last year, Jeff Ulbrich was Raheem Morris's defensive coordinator, but Ulbrich had come from the New York Jets, where he worked under Robert Saleh, which creates an interesting connection with the 49ers defense, right? But the Jets didn't blitz all that much. They blitzed at the second highest rate in the league, and they really tailored their defense around adaptable personnel in order to get pressure and to create some interesting things in the back end. They drafted Jaylen Walker, for example. We're going to listen to Raheem Morris talking about Jaylen Walker and defensive adaptability. Anyway, well, a lot of what the Falcons did makes me think Raheem Morris is going to love Upton Stout. This is going to be a foundational pillar around which the 49ers build their defense, because he wants people blitzing from non-standard defensive line pass rushing alignments. And even if he doesn't do it at the number 2 highest rate in the league, I think that the 49ers rate's going to go up. I think a lot of the creativity is going to go up for San Francisco, and we can talk about some of the veteran free agents whom the 49ers might bring in. Trey Hendrickson being available. Now, it's interesting because he had that core muscle surgery in December, so it's a really good thing the 49ers didn't trade for him. Coming out of this NFL Combine, it looks like Cincinnati, in fact, will not franchise tag Trey Hendrickson. I think that was something that would be idiotic. It would have to be the second straight franchise tag, 120% of the cost of the first one. And Trey Hendrickson coming off of a surgery that's, Nick Bosa had core muscle surgery a long time ago, but Hendrickson is a much older player. I do not think that he is going to be a player who fetches $30 million on the open market. I wouldn't be surprised if he hit the 20s. Remember that Trey Hendrickson was a player who led the league in pressures over the past or preceding 4 seasons, entering the last one. But because he started to run into some of those injury problems this year, the franchise tag definitely was not at the right amount for the Bengals to apply it again. So he's going to hit free agency. There's going to be a star edge rusher available. If the 49ers really, really want to invest and bolster the side opposite Nick Bosa, that will be a possibility. I think that John Franklin Myers, the defensive tackle, might be more of a realistic 49ers play, just because they might get more value at the defensive tackle position than they will at defensive end, where they're tend to be bigger overpays. But Hendrickson should be on the market. Somebody like Joey Bosa as a tier 2 edge rusher should be on the market as well, probably attainable for somewhere between 10 and 12 million. The 49ers were in on that last season. Could he bolster what Raheem Morris is trying to do? And then, we tossed Dre Greenlaw into the title because there's a chance that he's a cap casualty in Denver. And I also tossed Dre Greenlaw into the title here because as we discuss this Raheem Morris defense, I do wonder if there is a de-emphasis of the linebacker position relative to what we had seen for years under Robert Saleh, who is the linebacker whisperer. I wouldn't be surprised if he drafted Sonny Styles at number 4 for the Tennessee Titans. But, there was a time, and Mike and I were texting about this last night, where the 49ers had Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, and Azeez Al-Shaair as linebackers 1 to 3. And it's one of those examples of you don't know you're in the good old days until you're not in the good old days anymore. You wish you could know that you're in the good old days while you're still in them. The 2022 49ers, again, Warner, Greenlaw, Al-Shaair. It will likely never get better than that for San Francisco, probably for the rest of their franchise history at linebacker. they had a very linebacker-centric scheme especially when they were in the depth of the Saleh, D'Amico Ryans era D'Amico Ryans a former all-pro linebacker in his own right. Robert Saleh, obviously somebody who came up with a linebacker coaching background before he became the defensive coordinator. So that defense revolved around the strength at that position. Those guys, maybe they are walking back through that door if they can get Dre Greenlaw back. But still, it's not going to be the prime version of Dre Greenlaw alongside Fred Warner, alongside Azeez Al-Shaair. I think that the league is shifting. I think that the comparative advantage that the 49ers had gotten out of the linebacker position by putting in a bunch of guys who had safety DB background into that position is something that essentially the whole league is now copying, with the linebackers downsizing and them being able to cover. I think that the nexus of NFL defenses, when we're talking back seven, because the defensive line is always going to be of paramount importance, but when we're talking back seven, I think the nexus is moving to the DBs. I think it could be moving to either safeties or safeties that can move up and match up in man coverage. So nickelbacks, right? Nickelbacks and safeties, there's a lot of interchangeability between those two positions. A big reason why the 49ers drafted Marquise Siegel last year with his great athletic measurements. They're going to hope for him to be able to flex down toward the line of scrimmage with some of his speed, with some of his burst, and pick guys up one-on-one. But your Upton Stouts, that's where these modern era defenses are going to be centered, unless you can get three linebackers as good as the 49ers had in 2022, and probably is not likely. So as they move on to this next Raheem Morris era, we talk about where the focus is going to be on the back end. And I think that nickelback was Stout, safety, which the 49ers need to revamp this offseason. There's a very, very good rookie class at safety, and there are also some intriguing veterans. Mike and I were talking about one of them. His name is Andre Cisco. He is still only 25 years old. He played for the Jets this past season, was with Jacksonville before that, and probably his season ended with a torn pectoral muscle. The fact that he's not coming off a lower body injury, I think, is actually an arrow up. I mean, you could talk about guys whose seasons ended last year coming off an ACL Achilles. I would, hesitate to say that he's going to be at full speed this next season. But the fact that he's coming off of the pectoral injury tells me that if his rehab goes correctly, he should still be at full speed. This is still somebody who's going to be in his athletic prime, and somebody who racked up takeaways, especially during his time with Jacksonville. I know that he was on an absolutely terrible Jets team last year, but over his time with the Jags, there was a season where Andre Cisco had 4 interceptions. So he's got some ball hawking ability in him, and the 49ers definitely need that from the safety position. And I think it's going to be demanded by Raheem Morris that they generate more takeaways from the back end. I mean, I'll just go through some of the statistics over Andre Cisco's years with the Jacksonville Jaguars back when Doug Peterson was the head coach there. He was able to generate those takeaways. He had 3 interceptions in 2022, 4 interceptions in 2023, and then 1 in 2024. Did not have a good year with the Jets, not in this uniform. It wasn't good for Andre Cisco, but the time with the Jags on a better defense, especially in 2022 and 2023, solid for him. And he had 12 interceptions in college back in Syracuse. So obviously somebody with a nose for the football. Just one example of a player the 49ers might be able to bring in via free agency to shore up one of their weakest positions that I think does need to get shored up, with Raheem Morris as their new coordinator. I want to bring in some of what Raheem Morris has talked about. Let's just have a quick listen to Raheem Morris. This is talking about Jaylen Walker, who was the number 15 overall pick for the Atlanta Falcons last year. He was a player, people were just raving about him because of his ability to play multiple different spots, linebacker, kind of even a stack-like position, but then rush the passer as well. And Atlanta loved that adaptability. I know Morris loved that adaptability. We could talk more about Morris's background in several different schemes, so you could see how versatility could be something that he might be even more proficient at leveraging as a defensive coordinator as the 49ers try to move into a new era. But I first want to take a look back at his former stop and the way that he talked about a particularly versatile player.
Way you just explained him to me, being able to come off the edge, being able to move around. He's very self-aware. And if you ever talk to this young man, he'll kind of tell you what he thinks he is. And he's 30% off the edge. He's 30% blitzing through a gap. He can do some different things in the back end. He can drop. He can do all kinds of different things. So, he's definitely a threat, and he's definitely provides a threat for us that would allow us to utilize him in the most captivating ways. And, we got a lot of coaches up there that are just gunning to use him and gunning to find different ways to get it done. And I just can't say enough good things about him.
So obviously the 49ers don't have Jaylen Walker, but we'll see who they draft. And they do have, when I say they don't have Jaylen Walker, they have this guy. They have Upton Stout. And, physically he's not as big as Nick Emmanwori, who really I thought was a supercharger for the Seattle Seahawks defense this year. His ability to play a third safety, but he was big enough to play as a linebacker for the Seahawks. So it was like, what the hell are they even running? It was so amorphous for them on the back end. And they, the 49ers with Upton Stout, I think saw something related, but not quite the same as what the Seahawks try to do and did successfully with Emmanwori. They saw a smaller player who'd be able to cover receivers, but also blitz because of how, he's strong, but he can also fit into really tight quarters because of how small he is. I mean, I think they actually looked at Upton Stout and they said that the lack of size, something that made him overlooked until they were able to draft him in the third round. I mean, it wasn't a first round pick, even though he was a very, very complete player over his time in college at Western Kentucky. I think that they saw the lack of size as something that could be leveraged in their advantage. Somebody that could fit through tight quarters, somebody that could just be a nuisance, be tough to block because of the lower pad level in traffic. And because he was so strong, because he had the most bench press reps of any cornerback at the 2025 NFL Combine, they thought that he was tough enough, and they thought that he was rigid enough to be able to work in physical spaces, maybe even work when some tight ends tried to block him. And, the agility and the size that could work against the bigger offensive linemen. Of course, you're not going to ask Upton Stout to go mano-a-mano, strength on strength against the offensive lineman, a tackle that has him fully engaged. But if the tackle is 320 pounds and Upton Stout's there at 5'8" or 5'9", and obviously much quicker than the tackle, that's somebody who can duck around the offensive tackle. And I think we already saw some of that from Upton Stout's game. So he could bring the run defense. Obviously, the coverage was a work in progress, but something that I thought improved significantly over the 2025 season. And then he could blitz, and he led the entire league. He led all cornerbacks with 10 pressures. And again, Raheem Morris last year oversaw an Atlanta defense that did bring the heat. Morris's background we can get into by looking at some of his interviews with the Rams. I love this kind of stuff. I love going back and looking at some of the stuff that Raheem Morris talks about when it comes to his coaching progression. Have a listen to this, and then I'm going to break it down. Now, of course, some of these Rams interviews, he's talking about Jalen Ramsey, he's talking about Sean McVay, and this is in 2021 when he was first hired by LA. So but you have to extrapolate here, and you have to project forward thinking about his fit with the 49ers. He's very close with Kyle Shanahan. He was very close with Sean McVay. These are all guys that have intersected at different parts of their coaching career, including on that Washington staff under Mike Shanahan. But I think that a lot of the things that Morris discusses about the Rams apply to the 49ers now, because both of these teams are run in a similar way. A lot of the same principles are at play. And then when he goes back and he talks about his past, learning in Tampa, right, and then picking stuff up from Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley, and that entire tree, then that obviously applies to now with the 49ers. So let's listen right now.
I've always been nosy when it comes to offensive football. So at a very young age, I was able to sneak into John Gruden's meetings when he was dealing with the quarterback and having his quarterback school. I've always been nosy, been able to be around Kyle Shanahan, been able to be around Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, and all these different boy geniuses right now that we all got going on. And I'm around lead dog catalyst, boy genius himself, being able to work for him again. But being around these guys and you talk offense and you do the things that you want to do, you formulate how you want to play defense and what you want to do against these guys. You know, some of our calls now relate like that. Some of our calls sound like offensive calls. Some of our alerts, some of our checks and balances, things that we do are all formulated based off your offensive knowledge and some of the things that you've been able to do in the past. And it only gets better. Going into an OTA day, which we hope this year, or going into a training camp, or however it may look, when you compete against your own, it only makes it more relevant in the competition and the trash talk that can go along with that. Sean is a great coach. I love being around him. I can't wait to be back around him when we're on the field for the excitement and the competitive nature of how he is.
So that right there was the intro press conference. I think they had to do it not in person because it was in 2021 when stuff was still shut down. But that was Raheem Morris talking about Sean McVay when he was hired by the Rams. The reason that it's so useful to play right now is because the 49ers have not yet done the Raheem Morris intro press conference. And I wouldn't expect them to do that until probably the Monday before the NFL draft. That's when they did it last season. And they brought Robert Saleh into the media workroom, and Robert Saleh talked about a whole bunch of stuff about how his philosophy had evolved, you know, what the head coaching job with the Jets had taught him, some of the plans that he had for the 49ers in the 2025 season. And I thought that it was an extremely insightful press conference from Robert Saleh. So we're not going to get the Raheem Morris version of that probably for another month and a half, close to 2 months. But it's probably going to sound a lot like that initial one with the Rams, except you're going to be able to swap Kyle Shanahan with, or Sean McVay with Kyle Shanahan. And he talked about John Gruden at the very start of that. So Morris goes all the way back to the Tampa Bay staff where John Gruden was the head coach. Kyle Shanahan started as a quality control guy there, and John Lynch was actually a player. So we're going to listen to more quotes. This is awesome because he has taken ideas from every single stop, but those were the old Tampa 2 days. So Monty Kiffin was the defensive coordinator, and obviously Lynch was a player. You still had Warren Sapp. You had those guys with Tampa Bay. Football has changed so much over the 2+ decades since then, and Morris went from working four-man front to working on the offensive side of the ball to working with three down defenses, working with Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley type of system. And that's what he inherited with the Rams in 2021. Then when they went back to the Falcons, they were running more wide 9 stuff, and most of the league is running wide 9 stuff. So what we're going to see is Raheem Morris melding a lot of, his pre-existing stuff and a lot of his just 20+ years of experience with Kris Kocurek. The 49ers are keeping Kris Kocurek, the defensive line coach, aboard. They were one of the early teams to adopt the wide 9 back in 2019, which involves stretching the defensive lineman out, bigger gaps in between each defensive lineman, setting up better edge rushing angles. Now, with most of the teams running that, of course, the 49ers are going to take the strengths of the wide 9, but they're going to try to mix it in with what Raheem Morris has been running. And I think a lot of that has been related to higher blitz rates and then, of course, some more complexity coverage-wise on the back end. Let's listen a little bit more to Raheem Morris in that initial press conference with the Rams.
Again, you hate to go back and keep talking about your Tampa days, but it was just fortunate for me to go there. When I first started at Tampa, I felt like it was the Harvard of football. I walked into a building where Monty Kiffin was the defensive coordinator. I walked into a building where Mike Tomlin was the secondary coach, and I was able to assist him. Joe Barry, which you guys are very familiar with, was our linebacker coach. Our D-line coach was Rod Marinelli. And those guys all had something in common that I thought was very unique. They were great communicators. And being a great communicator, they did it in all their own different ways, their own different tones, and you're able to steal from all those guys. You got to been around Joe Barry for the last couple of years, and you know how well he communicates with his guys. You know how well he's able to communicate with the media. You know how well he's able to get his message across to his guys to go out there and perform at a high level. And one of the things that I got from Mike Tomlin is how to be able to talk to people, be direct, to be able to get those guys together and go out there and be their best selves.
So how about that Mike Tomlin reference at the end? That's fascinating too, because on that Tampa staff, back when Raheem Morris was a very, very entry-level NFL assistant, he was actually the assistant DB coach in a room that featured John Lynch, the player, and Mike Tomlin was the head DB coach. So, I mean, talk about football being a small world. This guy's on a staff with Tomlin just being a DB coach well before his long, long tenure with the Pittsburgh Steelers as the head coach, which just ended about a month ago. But John Lynch is still a player. Like, that's before Lynch went to Denver and then went to New England and then retired and then became a broadcaster from Fox and then became the 49ers GM in 2017. So talk about full circle. Now Lynch is entering his 10th season as the 49ers GM. Raheem Morris, who used to be the assistant DB coach in the room when Lynch was playing in Tampa Bay under Mike Tomlin, following the Herm Edwards years as the DB coach of the Bucs, he coached John Lynch. There was a whole other connection there. Now Morris is the 49ers defensive coordinator under Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. So really cool small world stuff. And if you want to expand on all that, Raheem Morris worked with Kyle Shanahan at several stops, including in Atlanta, where he was the wide receivers coach under Shanahan in 2016. Now, I'm going to play you this next clip when we're talking about Sean McVay, talking about Raheem Morris coaching wide receivers back in the day. But I want you to keep in mind what we just heard from Raheem Morris talking about the importance of communication. And in the first clip I played you, he talked about how his defensive terminology has evolved to include offensive-like lingo. This is all part of how the league is trending. This is all part of combating what is, I think, rules-wise, an offensively favored league, right? We see everything in the NFL seem to favor the offense, and we saw the general trend of football over the course of the past decade or so favor the offensive side of the ball. The great minds in this game, the young minds that had infused the game with a lot of new ideas, like a Kyle Shanahan, like a Sean McVay, they were bringing their adaptability in at a rate that defenses were not really keeping up with. I don't think that it is a coincidence that the guys who have the best chance to counter this have a background working the offensive side of the ball and are bringing some offensive principles and some offensive communication styles, some offensive lingo to the defensive side of the ball. The same versatility that made the offense so good is now making defenses better, and I think that's the next step for this 49ers defense. Anyway, let's listen to Sean McVay talking about Raheem Morris back when he used to coach the wide receiver position.
This. So when Raheem, he's going through and, he's the assistant head coach and Dan Quinn relies on him so heavily. So he says, hey, Raheem, like for you, you've done such a great job, but I'd like for you to, what do you think about coaching the receivers? And Raheem's like, so what do you think about that? I said, well, Raheem, you're a great coach. You know the game, but you haven't coached receivers. How the hell that going to work? He goes, it's easy. Good job, Julio.
That was in 2016 when they had Julio Jones with the Atlanta Falcons. So, I mean, either Sean McVay's funny or Raheem Morris is funny, or they're both funny. It's all part of the same group. And obviously that was under Kyle Shanahan in 2016 and the Falcons. That was a record-setting offense. But Morris continued working with the receivers even beyond that. And I just think that it was very valuable for him to have that experience on that side of the ball. Kyle always talks about it for himself. Back when he was in Tampa, he started as a defensive quality control guy. Kyle always talks about not only leveraging the knowledge of what the offense might do from a strictly X's and O's schematic perspective based on down and distance. Kyle also talks about, and Christian McCaffrey has delved into this, and Christian has been better and better with the media. He has a very intelligent, insightful way of describing how his coach operates. He says that Kyle Shanahan often can play off of the emotions of certain defenders. So he knows if a linebacker gets a little too aggressive or a little too excited in certain situations, he can then take advantage of that and call a play that exposes whatever the overplay from the offensive side of the ball is. And I don't think that Kyle would be able to do that nearly as effectively if he didn't spend some time coaching on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that you're going to probably see a lot of the same dynamics from Raheem Morris, and that is how the 49ers are hoping to move this defense to another level. And they definitely need to move to another level. I know it's so hard to evaluate San Francisco's defense from last season through the analytical lens because so many guys were hurt. I mean, if we just look at the depth chart here, let's get this up open on the screen. I mean, let's just go through this position by position and see what they had available and what they didn't have available. I'm going to put like strike throughs through guys they didn't have available last year. So Nick Bosa, nope. Michael Williams, he got hurt halfway through. That was terrible for the 49ers. They didn't have Evan Anderson and Sebastian Valdez, not because of injuries, but because those two guys were on the practice squad. So out of my projected 53-man roster, which isn't complete yet because free agency and the draft still has to happen, only West and Alfred Collins, two rookies, Bryce Huff and Keon White, who didn't come into the back half of the year, the trade deadline, were available for this defensive line. So obviously a lot of pieces that the 49ers needed more from are just going to be walking through that door and available for this team when Raheem Morris takes over as the defensive play caller in Melbourne when they kick off against the Rams. At the linebacker position, obviously no Fred Warner. They finished the season without Tatum Bethune. No Nick Martin. I mean, once he finally was able to crack into the lineup, Nick Martin was in the concussion protocol very shortly after that, and he never exited the concussion protocol. And you know what? D. Winters, I know that he was available more or less over this season, but also got hurt a bunch of times. You could essentially cross off everybody from this linebacker room. It's crazy how hurt the 49ers were last year. Lenore stayed healthy for the majority of the year. Renardo Green stayed healthy, but there were some issues there. Upton Stout, that was big. Malik Mustafa, Marquise Siegel was benched for the 49ers. Jair Brown, I don't know if that's somebody that they wanted in the starting lineup, but ultimately made it in there. The most healthy room for San Francisco was the defensive backfield, but you could see the damage that they took in this front seven. All those names that I crossed out, that is something that is just going to have to be much, much more available to start this journey under Raheem Morris. And then the big questions for the 49ers are, how do you construct it? What kind of fronts are you using? You know, the 5-1 fronts coming out of the 3-4, which would really only require one linebacker. That could be a way the 49ers go. Where are you lined up as far as the defensive line goes when you are employing a 5-man front, which I think they're going to do a lot more than last season? They ran 55-man fronts last year on 50 snaps. It was about 8% of the time. Does that go up to 20% of the time, 30% of the time? The reason you run a 5-man front is to take away the run game. But you hope you can do that, especially with some of the talent that you bring in to a line up front. You hope you can do that without losing effectiveness against the pass. And I think it puts more strain on your secondary, on your defensive backs, because if you're running 5 up front, you're probably not going to be relying. You're definitely not going to be relying on 3 linebackers. And I think in the ideal world, you're relying on one supercharged linebacker. For the 49ers, that guy wears number 54. And then it's your nickel back. It's Upton Stout. It's your safety position. So I don't know. Do they draft somebody? Do they bring in an Andre Cisco or a player like that to bolster safety? And it's your cornerbacks. And the Rams, you know, back under Brandon Staley, moving to Raheem Morris, they relied on a lot of adaptability on the back end. I mean, Jalen Ramsey would play all over the formation. We talked about this a little bit when Brandon Staley joined the 49ers for the 2024 season. That was under Nick Sorensen, and unfortunately that 49ers team just so many injuries, and I don't think Nick Sorensen was ready to carry that torch, especially after guys got hurt, after they lost Nick Bosa. But in an ideal world, that 2024 defense, had there been better availability for the unit, I wouldn't have been surprised to see Diamond Lenore play a little bit more like a Jalen Ramsey for the Rams under Brandon Staley and then under Raheem Morris. Now, getting Upton Stout is interesting for the 49ers because Lenore has played inside out, nickel back, outside. That's what I mean by the star position that Ramsey played, the versatile position. Upton Stout, I know you're probably not going to line him too much up at outside cornerback, but he can be all over a lot of the field. And if Lenoir can be over a lot of different parts in the field, those are two defensive backs who immediately have immense positional versatility that I think Raheem Morris can have a lot of fun with. And I'm intrigued to see this 49ers defense, to say the least. Never before have we entered a season with so many different possibilities on the table for San Francisco's defense. And they also have a new defensive backs coach. They've got Jerry Gray, who was the Atlanta Falcons assistant under Raheem Morris last year. He's a very experienced DB. He's been with Buffalo. He'd been with the Tennessee Titans. He replaces Daniel Bullocks, but I think that he's got a bigger Rolodex as far as what he's seen in the NFL than Daniel Bullocks, who left to be the DB coach of the Packers. And he does work in conjunction with Raheem Morris. And the fact that the 49ers did not keep Daniel Bullocks, the old DB coach, and decided to instead bring in Jerry Gray, and also tried to interview another coach of the Atlanta Falcons. They were obviously targeted at getting a new defensive backs coach to work under their new defensive coordinator. That tells me that some real changes could be coming to the back end. Now, a lot of people took that even a step further, and during the NFL Combine, there were some rumors, maybe the 49ers would want to trade Renardo Green. I would still be pretty surprised if something like that happened. Because in Renardo Green, you've got a young player who has shown a lot of upside already. I know that there was the brouhaha on the sideline in Seattle with Kyle Shanahan, where apparently Renardo Green ran the wrong coverage and then was benched for a couple plays, and the Seahawks scored a touchdown and the blowout was on. But Renardo has 17 pass breakups over his 2 seasons. Cornerback is a premium position. Renardo is still under rookie contract for 2 more years. He's the biggest corner the 49ers have. If they want to run any bit of press man, the best to do that is going to be Renardo Green. That's what he ran coming out of Florida State. So, I mean, Lenoir is obviously your foundational pillar, but Renardo Green, unless you get a nice trade return here, then somebody would have to really believe in him to give you that. And then the question would be, why don't you believe in Renardo Green? Because he's actually been fine for the 49ers over the first couple of years. Not without his deficiencies, but not a terrible corner. It just is hard for me to work out the math on a potential trade there. Like, anything is possible in this league. And I know that shakeups are coming, but I think they're probably more likely to happen at the safety position. Because Jair Brown, I mean, you talk about continuity on this 49ers defense. This is 5 defensive coordinators in 5 years. And it's gotten to the point where some of these guys are, draftees of a very bygone era. Like, Jair Brown was drafted with Steve Wilkes getting up on the table advocating for the 49ers to pick him in 2023. That was 4 defensive coordinators ago? You had Raheem Morris is the coordinator now, 2026. Robert Saleh in 2025, 2. Nick Sorensen in 2024, 3. Yeah, 4 defensive coordinators ago was Steve Wilkes in 2023. Sorensen was 2024. And Jair Brown is still on this football team. That's just how much coaching turnover you've had for the 49ers. So I wouldn't be surprised if Raheem Morris wanted to get his own guys in there at the safety position. That's the one spot where the 49ers in the secondary are really weak last year. Lenoir was good. Lenoir gets a bad rap with the whole JSN thing. He gave up 2 catches to JSN last year. Everybody tries to troll Diamante Lenoir, but whenever he was covering JSN, it was generally lights out. Like, he did a good job. Diamante Lenoir is a good player. Renardo Green gave up more coverage-wise for the 49ers than Lenoir, and I thought that sometimes he really was off in some of his coverage when he shouldn't have been, and obviously he messed up an important call in that game against the Seahawks, and that's what Kyle Shanahan was all over when he benched him. But I think there was still a lot more good than bad for Renardo Green, and I think there obviously was a ton of good for Upton Stout, who saved his best for last. I mean, he was the best 49ers defensive player on the field against the Seattle Seahawks in the playoffs. So the cornerback position wasn't bad for the 49ers last year. A lot of promise there. It's safety where I thought they were missing tackles in the run game, where they gave up a lot coverage-wise. I mean, Marquise Siegel was benched for a reason because of his struggles to play the ball downfield. Safety was sketchy. Linebacker was sketchy to the point where they had to sign Eric Kendricks off the street just to survive the season. I mean, they were struggling with Bethune, who was beaten up. Winters wasn't great for the 49ers. Martin wasn't even available, and obviously Warner got hurt in week 6 against Tampa Bay. And then with the pass rush, they had the fewest sacks in the league. So you could really look at the cornerback position and say that was the strength of this 49ers team, and that there's something here to work with if you're Raheem Morris and if you're Jerry Gray, the new DB coach, on the back end. Every single defense, though, and this is where we can go from the 1981 49ers, who won a Super Bowl, and they turned into a Super Bowl caliber team, I think, after they traded for Fred Dean, the great edge rusher in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They traded with the San Diego Chargers midseason to grab him. That pushed the 49ers over the top. So whether we're talking the 1981 49ers or we're going before that and we're talking about Gino Marchetti, one of the great pass rushers of all time, actually born in San Francisco, went to USF, didn't play for the 49ers. He played for the Baltimore Colts. But if we're going back then, or if we're talking about Fred Dean and the 49ers, if we're talking about Charles Haley and the 49ers in the late 80s, and then the balance of power tipping to the Cowboys and the 49ers traded Haley to Dallas after the 91 season, or if we're talking about Nick Bosa being a force multiplier, or if we're talking about the great New York Giants defensive lines that turned the tables on Tom Brady in 2 separate Super Bowls. I mean, all of those teams, I think if you boiled it down to the simplest element of defensive success, was the pass rush, was the defensive line. And the 49ers finished last in the NFL last year in sacks. They just didn't get after the quarterback nearly effectively enough after they lost their main man, Nick Bosa, a force multiplier. There you have him. Bosa gone after week 3, forced Bryce Huff into a much larger role than the 49ers had planned for Bryce Huff. You lose Michael Williams. That really, really hurts the 49ers because then you lose your edge setter, your double team guy on run defense. A lot of people who are underestimating the Michael Williams impact just aren't watching tape. They're just looking at PFF grades. We actually watch tape here, and we know that Michael Williams had a massive impact on setting the table for other edge rushers. Once you lost all that for the 49ers, it was going to be impossible to generate pressure at an above average level. And that, of course, hurt the rest of this defense. So the first thing that they're going to do this offseason, and John Lynch said it at the NFL Combine, they are going to try to rebuild this defensive line. And that's why we have to pay attention to Trey Hendrickson and Joey Bosa and somebody like John Franklin Myers. But if we're talking about the defensive end position, Hendrickson and Bosa, 2 veterans are going to be available. There obviously is room for these guys. Now, I think that the 49ers are a little bit better loaded actually at edge than they are at defensive tackle. But here's the nice thing for the 49ers. I said this morning. We were talking about John Franklin Myers. I'll repeat it now. The league is going the way of needing bigger defensive tackles. And the 49ers have 2 320-pounders. Why is that? Well, especially if you're running wide nines. And, you know, especially if you don't want to be in a 5-man front the whole time. If you're going to be in a 4-man front some of the time to diversify your defensive looks. If running attacks are back on the rise, which they are in this league, you need block gobblers in the middle. You need guys to occupy a lot of space. You need the strength to make sure that the defense does not collapse in the interior. And CJ West at 320 plus, Alfred Collins at 320 plus are both players cut from that cloth. The 49ers 2025 draft, I think, is looking very promising. I could go through the entire 49ers 2025 draft and give a better analysis than this garbage that we see on Twitter that people obviously try to cleverly composed, and it probably takes them an hour to come up with the right jab here and the right jab there. The 49ers 2025 draft class, though, its initial appearance was solid. I mean, starting with Mykel Williams, they had the number 6 run defense in all of football when he played last year. And that's even when Nick Bosa and, we could go Fred Warner, we could go through all the injuries for the 49ers defense. Even with those guys out, they held a top 10 run defense when Mykel Williams was in. Alfred Collins, didn't single-handedly win a game, but his contribution was necessary for the 49ers to beat the Rams. He made plays last year in the clutch. And I thought that he got better and better and better. Unfortunately, he was playing hurt, but that could be another reason to view his stock in a favorable light. He had shoulder surgery. He's going to fully recover. Alfred Collins is going to be one of the very necessary 320-plus pound tackles that are needed in this modern league for a good defense, and the 49ers have him on their team. Then Nick Martin, obviously the jury is still very much out, but he played his way into the third linebacker role by December, which I thought was impressive given how raw he was at the very start. I mean, this guy's an athletic specimen. You talk about Upton Stout putting up a ton of bench press reps. Nick Martin put up even more. He was in the high 20s. He led all the linebackers, and he can move too. He got 4.5 speed, putting up 28, 29 bench press reps. I mean, maybe it was 26. But Nick Martin, I mean, he's got the physical tools. He didn't look nearly comfortable enough in the preseason, but the 49ers trusted him by December, and then unfortunately the concussion happened. So jury is still out there. Upton Stout, killer pick for the 49ers. He's one of the better young defensive backs in the NFL. He was their 4th pick. CJ West, very good pick for the 49ers. I mean, a 4th-round defensive tackle, 320-plus pounds, who helped spearhead a transformation of your run defense. I mean, it's hard to ask for much more out of a 4th-round pick. I mean, I've listed 5 picks, and 4 of them are on their way to being hits for the 49ers. Then there's Jordan Watkins. That's obviously a TBD. I thought he looked really good in training camp, and you can't really expect much, especially out of a receiver coming in the 4th round until probably year 2. So we'll see. Well, this is Watkins' great chance. Marquise Siegel started for the 49ers. He was their 5th-round pick. Now, I know that there were struggles with him. We'll see how he reacts here in year 2. I don't think that there was any fear on Marquise Siegel's part when it came to the transition to the NFL level game, playing the run, hitting people, tackling people. I thought that he played fast. I just don't think that he had the ball skills yet. Like in coverage, he gave up a lot in coverage when he was right there, ready to make a play. Will those develop here in year 2? We'll see. He's going to get the coaching from Jerry Gray, the new defensive backs coach, but that has a chance to be a hit. You've got to be patient with some of these players. Jordan James, the running back TBD. Obviously, we saw him a little bit there at the end, but that's not something that the book is closed on yet. Curtis Rourke, the quarterback TBD. Junior Bergen, the wide receiver return specialist TBD, was on the practice squad. And Connor Colby, the offensive lineman. I think if he works on his body, George Kittle called him out for that. If he gets stronger, he could be a solid offensive lineman in this league. He was thrust into action a little bit too early last year. But if you objectively look at that 2025 49ers draft class, all 11 guys are still in the building for the 49ers. And I think an objective analysis is that class is off to a very, very promising start. And I understand it's hard for people to be patient. They want to see everybody play right away, but it's just not how this league works. They got a lot of immediate contributions, and I think those are a big arrow up. And the Mykel Williams ACL tear was a big bummer. Everybody gets that, but I don't think it taints the quality of the draft class. It was an ACL tear on the MetLife Stadium turf. 49ers could be in really, really solid position with those guys. And the reason I got into that discussion was talking about the 2 defensive tackles who are at the center of this class. And then Mykel Williams plays inside too. I think they've got a nice starting core here of young players around which to build. And then you could start talking about filling in veterans at defensive tackle and defensive end. And that's why we're talking about Hendrickson, Bosa, and John Franklin Myers. Then you start to wonder, okay, what do they do on the linebacker level? Does he like Winters enough to keep him around? Where's Nick Martin in all of this? Is he healthy enough for all this? We'll see at OTAs. Where's Tatum Bethune? I mean, not a fast linebacker, good instincts in college. Is he a Raheem Morris guy, or is he just going to run 5-man fronts the whole time and go 5-1, the penny front? And is it just going to be all reliant on Fred Warner? Caden Ellis, who was the great linebacker for the Falcons, he's going to make a lot of money. He's going to be a free agent. So I know that he's worked under Morris. He's worked in the system, but is Ellis somebody the 49ers can afford to bring over? I don't know. Linebacker is obviously a spot that you look at immediately when a team hires a new defensive coordinator. Some updates here entering this week. March 3rd, which is Tuesday, at 1 o'clock Pacific, it is the deadline for teams to apply franchise or transition tags to players. The only potential candidate, and the 49ers don't plan on using the tag on him, but it is a potential candidate, is Eddie Pinheiro, the kicker. So maybe we start to see some contracts coming here before the March 3rd deadline. The most interesting one is probably in Indianapolis, where they have two candidates. They have the quarterback, Daniel Jones, and they have the receiver, Alec Pierce. They have told Alec Pierce that they plan to franchise or transition tag him if they can't get an extension done. But they also might need to use, and you only get one of these per season, they might need to use the tag on Daniel Jones. And apparently they're not close to a deal with Daniel Jones. So if they have to use the tag on Daniel Jones, then Alec Pierce, well, he's probably going to hit free agency unless they can find a way to keep him around with the deal before March 9th, before that legal tampering window opens up and other teams can talk to him. So that might affect the 49ers because Alec Pierce, I think, would fit them, but he might be the most expensive receiver on the free agent market if he does get there. The price is still currently too high for Max Crosby. Jeremy Fowler said that at the moment, the asking price for Crosby is still too high for teams to act on. The Raiders let it leak a week plus ago that they wanted 2 first-round picks and an impact player for Max Crosby. I laughed at that price because I don't think that this deserves the Micah Parsons treatment. The Raiders apparently have not lowered that price enough. The 49ers are very interested. I can tell you that. But until there's no deadline right now. Like, there's a franchise tag deadline, but Crosby, he signed a new contract last year, so that's not a deadline. The new league year is starting soon, so maybe that pushes some action. Maybe that pushes the Raiders to lower the price a little bit. But as of right now, holding pattern because the Raiders have not lowered that price. But if the 49ers add Max Crosby, great. I mean, I could see him fitting into this equation very, very well for San Francisco. Until then, you might have to settle for trying to sign, if you want a big name edge rusher, Trey Hendrickson for $20 million plus. Joey Bosa, probably $10 to $13 million. Guys the 49ers have been interested in for quite some time. Will the price finally be right? We might see. And I would think that the deadline for Max Crosby movement might be the NFL draft, which is at the end of April. Anyway, a couple of the best questions. I'm happy to answer them. Then I think we're going to go eat some cookies. I think Lombardi herself is making some nice cookies. I'm excited here to eat some good cookies on Sunday evening. Yep, we have people talking about Alec Pierce, probably $30 million a year. Wouldn't be surprised. Do we have any good questions in here? You like Christian Kirk or Wandale Robinson? I think Wandale Robinson could fit the 49ers for sure. If you're looking for a nice versatile weapon that probably you can get, what would that be? 15 to 20 million? Could you get him under 15? Probably not. I mean, you have to overpay in free agency. That's what makes it really tough. I talked about Romeo Doubs this morning. Yes, Romeo Doubs would be somebody who the 49ers might be able to get for less than $15 million. Now, you never know. The market can always overinflate in free agency, so you have to wait. Mike says that Christian Kirk would be super cheap. Maybe that will be somebody that the 49ers do end up going after as a low-risk deal at the wide receiver position. Here we have Natasha saying, would love it if the 49ers got Trey Hendrickson and Joey Bosa and Dre Greenlaw back. All three. That would be crazy. Any updates on Eddie Pinheiro? Nope. Franchise tag, transition tag deadline is Tuesday. 49ers still trying to negotiate with Eddie Pinheiro. Thank you. Look, we got the 49ers and Lakers crossover fan. I know there's a lot of you. And because the super chat is of the second variety, or, the step up, that's Laker gold. I guess 49ers gold too, but it looks just like the Lakers jersey there. And new member. You guys can all sign up for memberships whenever you'd like. All right, we've been going 50 minutes. That's about long enough. We'll talk to everybody very soon. Hope you enjoyed the discussion about the 49ers defense under Raheem Morris. Complex stuff, exciting stuff. It's good food for thought. We'll talk to you soon.